Hey everyone, Allison here, the dyer behind LoftyLoops yarns, and I just want to say a huge thank you for your support, and your support means the world to me. As part of that thank you, I wanted to share an in-depth dye studio vlog with you. So that is what this is. This is going to be more in-depth and more talking and more step-by-step process than my typical dye with me videos, where you're almost like watching over my shoulder with very minimal conversation or talking or anything like that. This is going to be more in depth, where I take you through using the inspiration photo to picking the colors, to figuring out how I want to lay those colors on the yarn, and to get to a finished product. The finished product in this video is part of the Glint Glitter Club. This one is January's colorway, and I'm really excited about it. And I love how this colorway turned out. I end up knitting a swatch using a DK mini that I added to the Dyebath as well, or the dye batch, I should say. And I love how this turned out and how it ended up working up and in that swatch. Typically with my clubs, I will re-release them the following year, so there is a potential for this to come back in the new year, in 2023. Oh my goodness, 2023, I don't know. But again, just wanted to say a huge thank you for being a channel supporter, and let's get to it. Let's jump over to the dye studio, shall we? The first thing I always do is soak the skeins after I've got the zip ties on them. I'll soak them in a cool bath just to make sure all of the yarn is fully saturated with water. And sometimes I'll put citric acid in if I know I'm going to be doing a fully speckled colorway. But in this case, I didn't want the dye to adhere to the yarn immediately, so there is no citric acid in this. It's just cool water. So I'll get all of the yarn and smush it down really well and squeeze it and just make sure that it gets fully saturated and sopping wet, and then I'll end up transferring it out to the dye studio. Hey y'all, I'm going to be picking colors for the first Glint and Glitter Club colorway. I've got my camera set up here, I've got pans set up, and I'm going to walk you through my process of checking out the inspiration photo, which I will place here and will leave up in the corner as I'm walking through this. But I'm going to check out the inspiration photo, pull colors from my dye shelves, and figure out what the plan's going to be for this club. So let's get to it. I ended up picking quite a few colors, and the first one I started with was mushroom. It's actually shiitake mushroom, and this was going to be that really beigey base color that you can kind of see in the background there. But then there's also some hints of blue, so I went with a Wedgwood blue that I wanted to add a little bit of to that shiitake mushroom for the base. And then for all of the bright splashes of colors, I've got a bright aqua, purple pop, which is a fluorescent color, and pink orchid, which is another gorgeous color, one of my favorites. Golden poppy I use all the time. It's a really pretty bright gold. And then I believe at some point I end up grabbing, yep, there I go. I'm gonna go grab a couple others because I had a thought, and I believe, let's see if I'm wrong, but I think I ended up going with a fluorescent yellow as well to bring out more of those bright yellows, as well as a bright red. So you can see there on that top bird, its chest has a really intense bright red, and I wanted to bring that out and put that into the skein as well. Now it's time to grab the yarn and get the dye bath ready. So here's the part where I add the citric acid to the water that's already in the pans. Nothing has been turned on or heated up just yet. So I just put a good, I believe it's a full tablespoon of citric acid into the water, and I make sure that that is all nice and dissolved and mixed up. And then I'm going to start adding my base layers. So like I mentioned before, I'm going to start with that mushroom color, and it looks like I've got a 1/4 teaspoon here I picked these up at IKEA. They're fantastic because they're little metal teaspoon sets, and they're perfect for using in the dye studio. And I should also mention any utensils that you may use, whether it be the whisk, the pans, the teaspoons, stirring spoons, tongs, anything like that. If you use them with the dye, they cannot go anywhere near food anymore. The dye is toxic, so there cannot be any cross contamination. So I just wanted to call that out. You should also always wear a respirator mask, as well as wear gloves. I'm really bad at putting gloves on. I know I should be better. But you can see I've added the base layer and then got that really good and mixed up. And then just using a little bit of a paper towel to check to see if I'm happy with the strength of the color that's in the pan. Once that dye is all mixed up and dissolved and I have a consistent color all around, you can see that there are no more dye particles that are splitting or throwing off random colors. I will go and grab the yarn and then slowly just lay it into the water. I've got a glove on, so I'm using it to kind of, using my hand to smush the yarn down in that water to really get that colored water to saturate the damp yarn. I always, after taking it out of the dye bath, I will squeeze it out pretty well so it's not dripping, sopping wet when I go to put it into the dye pan, but I do have it fairly damp, and it just tends to help the dye spread out more and disperse better amongst the fibers. Once I'm happy with that, I'll put the lid on it, turn the heat on, and let the heat plus that citric acid bind the color into the yarn. So now it's got a really nice light beige base, and the heat's up, so I'm ready to speckle. And so I'm tossing a glove on, and I'm going to start with that Wedgwood blue and really just kind of lay down a little bit of blue all over just to kind of bring in those background blues. And instead of letting it sit and get crispy speckles, I'll use my tongs to mix them around a little bit, so that'll just really soften up where that dye is hitting the yarn, causing it to kind of spread out almost like a watercolor effect. So you can see that happening there, because I didn't want really crisp, harsh speckles just yet. And I'll go ahead and flip the yarn over so I can make sure to hit the other side. And then go back in with that Wedgwood blue and just add some more color to the other side of the skein. Oftentimes, if you don't flip the skeins around, that's when you're knitting a pair of socks and one sock is really heavily saturated and then the next sock is quite less saturated, a little bit of lighter colors, maybe not quite as speckled. That's why, because when the yarn is being dyed, it doesn't get flipped over and the same happen on the other side. So just the way that you cake up the yarn and it works out, that is why you'll sometimes see that happen. Now I want to go in and add those bright splotches of colors. So this blue is just perfection, and it really, I think, grabs that blue color out of the inspiration photo really well. So I'm just heavily speckling all over with those really bright, intense colors. So now I've got the orchid on, I've got the, let's see, what was it? Bright aqua. And now I'm going back in with that purple pop. So I'm bringing the purples out, and you can just see it magic form right in front of your eyes. This is literally my favorite part of dyeing. I love tossing speckles on and just watching the colors explode. But you can see now where those colors in the inspiration photo are really starting to take shape. And we'll still have, where this color and speckle isn't hitting, we'll still have that beigey blue underneath, which is going to be really, really nice. And so I'll let this sit for just a little bit, and then I'm going to go back in and add some more speckles. This is honestly probably a little too warm. It's still okay, but I probably had it turned up higher than it needed to be. You don't necessarily need to bring it to a full boil, just kind of where it's putting off a lot of steam. It's hard for me to judge in my dye studio in the wintertime because it is my garage, and so it's usually chilly out there, which results in much more steam than I would see in the summertime. So you can see there it's even steaming up my camera lens. But I flipped it over and you can see how on the other side the colors aren't quite as bright and vivid. That's what I was talking about earlier. Oftentimes I will speckle really heavy on one side and then flip them over and speckle with different colors on the other side, just to kind of add that little bit of random variegatedness, stuff like that. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding all of the yellows to the other side of the skein. And so I've tossed on the golden poppy, and then this is where I went back and I grabbed that fluorescent yellow, and that is just a really intense, bright neon yellow that just makes other colors pop so well. It's one of my favorites. It's so cool when you layer it on top of other colors. So you can just see how bright that just became out of nowhere. And then I'm taking that Chinese red and really heavily speckling that in to bring in that bright red of that bird's chest. So you can see my glove. I do end up losing a lot of dye on my glove because of the steam, the condensation, things like that, but it doesn't really bother me. I've tried a lot of different things in terms of speckling, and I keep coming back to just using my fingers with a glove. That tends to work out really well for me, and I don't know, I'm happy with it, but feel free to just try different things, experiment, find what works for you if you're into dyeing. Yeah, there is no wrong answer. There is no right answer. It's just whatever works best for you. Now that I know that I'm happy with that first batch, I'm going to go ahead and dye up the rest of the skeins. So I'm going to stop talking and put on some fun music and speed up this process and just let you watch it from start to finish, and then I will be back to chat some more. Whew, that was fun. So at this point, I've let the skeins, they came up to temp, they sat, they cooked for a while, and then I turned all of the heat off, left the lids on, and let them sit overnight. Those fluorescent colors really take a long time to soak up and exhaust completely, and I didn't want to run the risk of colors bleeding, so I did let them sit overnight and continue just to come down to temperature on their own, or room temperature on their own rather, and just make sure all of that dye was soaked up so you can see that the water is clear again, which is what we're after. So I've pulled the yarn out and I will go soak that. I always soak it in some soapy water just to make sure, again, if there's any loose dye particles, anything that didn't exhaust, that I get all of that washed off. So once it gets to you and you start using it, you're not getting dye all over your hands or colors running or what have you. And I usually end up reusing my water quite often, especially if I've exhausted all of the colors. There's no reason why I can't reuse the water that's in the pan, and it just saves me trips, and it's, you know, a little bit better on the environment. So I'm getting ready to dye up the minis that are going to create the sock sets, and I chose to go with a twilight gray color. This is more of a purpley gray, kind of a darker purpley gray, I believe. It's a really pretty color. I use it a lot. I really like this as a base color too. So tossing in, I usually start with a 1/4 teaspoon and go from there. I ended up adding another 1/4 teaspoon. So I've got a 1/2 teaspoon of twilight gray. I wanted it to be a really deep, dark, saturated color, but I usually start with a 1/4 teaspoon and work my way up from there. It's always easier to start less, add more, than add too much, and you can't take it away at that point. So I start small, and I don't know, that's just how it works for me. Again, your results may vary, but it's just a lot of trial and error and experimentation in the world of yarn dyeing. So I'm going to go ahead and mix all of that up, make sure that it's really well dissolved, and then I'll toss the mini skeins in there and get those cooking. I missed recording the step right before this, but the twilight gray didn't end up quite dark enough for me. So I pulled the minis out after all of the color had exhausted, and I added some of this Raven, which is just a really deep black, but also tends to be more on the cool side, kind of a purpley black. So I added some of that Raven to the Dyebath and put the minis back in to really darken them up. And I'm super happy with how they turned out after that. Here we are quite a few days later. This is after I actually fully recovered from flu-rona. So once those minis were done, like I said, I soaked everything in a soapy bath, and then wrung them out using my Ninja spin dryer that just spins everything on a spin cycle and gets all of that extra water out. And then I hung them up to dry, and then they sat there for quite a while waiting to get to this point. So I was finally up, feeling better. I had fully quarantined, no more symptoms, all that good stuff. And so I'm ready to get these babies skeined up and labeled and out to the recipients. So I like to take my skeins and really just thwack them where I'm pulling apart really quickly and really hard, and just that helps all of the all of the yarn lay nicer. Sometimes when you're laying it to dry, air dry, it can kind of get a little, not tangled, but just looks a little kind of crinkly, I guess, like kind of like ramen noodles a little bit. But I just thwack the crap out of them, as you can see, and really get everything laying nicely and in the same direction, and that just helps the skeins look nicer in the long run. So going through, thwacking all of them, and then using my skein twister that I bought. It is a godsend if you are an indie dyer. If you don't have one, I highly, highly recommend getting one. It totally saves your shoulders and your elbows and your wrists from having to twist all of these by hand. So there is a little pedal there that you just put it on the hook and hit the pedal, and it skeins them all up beautifully and perfectly every single time. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this footage up. Everything is skeined up, and I've got my lights set up with my little backdrop things, and I'm getting ready to take some product photography and basically get them ready, get everything I need to do before I'm going to throw the labels on them and get them ready to ship out to customers. So I'm super pleased with how these turned out. The colors are just stunning. I think pulling those colors from the inspiration photo, I think it translated really well onto the yarn, and I'm super happy with how they look. I'm even happier with this swatch. So I mentioned that I dyed up a DK mini with the intention of creating a swatch with it, and look at those pops. I can't even. Now I feel like I need a sweater out of this. I just love it so much. I'm obsessed. Everything is labeled now. I've got all the stickers on there, everything that needs to be ready to go, and I'm going to go ahead and package them up, get them in their mailers, and get them sent off to the wonderful Glint Glitter Club subscribers. So I really, really, really hope that you enjoyed this dye with me session. Like I said, it was a little bit more in-depth than I normally do. Let me know in the comments if it was helpful, if you enjoyed that, if you'd rather just have the quiet, no talking with some music, chill aesthetic, if you will. I think that's what the kids say nowadays. I don't know. Again, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so, so much for watching and supporting me. It truly does mean the world to me, and I couldn't do this without you all. So I will see you again soon. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.